Welcome. My name is George Badalinsky, and I attended AI4 this year, which was an amazing conference. I wanted to thank AI4 for organizing such a wonderful conference and lining up so many great speakers. And these are some lessons that I learned this year that I'd like to share with you. Professor Satyam was one of the talks that really stood out to me. He kind of gave an essence of what artificial intelligence really means. And in his words, it's mimicking the human intelligence using computers. And that's all it is. And it's important to know this definition when you're applying or when you're hearing about this technology or making decisions about how this technology can be used in your organization, if you need it, and what are some of its strengths. So I think that point was driven very well by Professor Satyam. The other thing that he does is advises the energy industry, and some of the challenges that they have is about figuring out if a piece of land is viable enough to be able to extract oil from it. And that is a data-driven approach that is required in order to be able to make those decisions, because a lot of money is at stake, a lot of resources. And big data and artificial intelligence is used heavily in this industry to make those decisions. But he wanted to caution everyone to be wary of how this technology is used. He remembers back some years ago when big data pipelines were the most exciting thing in the tech industry, and a lot of people would come up to him and ask him, should we move all our data to Hadoop? How should we think about it? And his strengths were to ask some of the underlying questions, such as what would be the benefits be of moving your data pipeline to this specific technology or this specific framework, etc. So I think he had a very good perspective, and gave a lot of insight in respect to how to think about when your organization would be interested in integrating artificial intelligence, for example. This is a high-level agenda that I'm going to kind of adhere to. There was a lot of streams at the conference. Some of it was computer vision. I personally attended generative AI, and large language models is kind of the main topic there. So I will give a kind of sense of what the large language models are capable of, and how to think about it, and potentially how to bring it into your organization. The videos from the conference are not available yet, but if you go to the YouTube channel in about a couple of months, I think they should be. So about December 2023, unless maybe they'll be there a little faster. So large language models, the way to access them, one of my favorite services now is find.com, which is a Y Combinator company. So you can go there. They leverage ChatGPT-4. It's free to use, and it's a really great search, the way they've been able to implement it and design it. Other places are chat.openai.com or bard.google.com. And simply the way you interact with it, and I'm sure most of you have, you send a question, and then you receive a response, and you continue chatting with the language model to refine your answers. The magic, I'd like to, it looks like when you're using it, there's a lot of magic behind the service. So I'm going to explain how this magic is achieved, so you get a sense of what this technology is doing under the hood. One of the fundamental talks in the generative AI stream was understanding LLMs. So Abhishek from DeepMind, he was there talking about large language models, how to understand them, how to think about them. A lot of the complexities at the organization level are already solved by the people like Abhishek who are researching and building these large language models. So for our purposes, we can treat them as black boxes. They're very good at generating text, are capable of reasoning. And if you look at the lower left-hand side, you'll see some of the strengths of a large language model. So when you're considering integrating a large language model at your organization, you could look at some of these things and see if you're using any of these techniques for the business purposes that you have. The Palm model has about 540 billion parameters. It was trained on about 2,200 GPUs. A lot of times when you're interacting with the large language models, it's very important to give it as much context as you possibly can, so it can give you the best answers. And here's an example in the lower left-hand side about how Palm can distinguish between jargon and some common human, I guess, coined terms. For example, it's raining cats and dogs. What should I wear? And it's able to give you an answer that ignores essentially cats and dogs, or understands that cats and dogs means heavy rain in this context. So a lot of work has been done. It's continuously being done to train these models to become even better and more useful. It seems like prompt engineering is the job of the future. So definitely it's something to get familiar with. People at the conference were talking about some best practices around prompts and how to do it. And if you see here, some people have even written 6 pages worth of prompts, which to me I found really fascinating and exciting. You're also, when you're interacting with a large language model, you have to be very specific in order to get the best results. And here's an example of a great resource that I found during the conference that has example prompts here that you can go and look and hopefully fine-tune your own prompts. It also does evaluations of different large language models. And here's the ranking of as of today, what it looks like and how it's evaluated. So underneath, in order to be able to understand this technology, when you type something into a ChatGPT or a large language model, you receive words, or it's typing words to you. And a lot of this fundamentals essentially falls down on something called embeddings. How do the embeddings work? Well, every word is converted to its vector or numerical equivalent. And then these numerical representations get computed using dot product between different embeddings, and then a semantic similarity is derived. So if you look at the table below here, these are some sample words that have been taken and put into a matrix, and then the dot product between them is calculated. And the higher the number, the more likely that the next word that is generated by a large language model is going to be that word. So for example, for NYC, the highest probability word is stopping. And this is, you can see by a high number here. This project here, projector.tensorflow.org, is a great resource to be able to determine what is the semantic similarity between some words. So if you type in NYC stopping maybe, you see that these are the ways that the words are connected or closer together. The closer words are the higher probable words. And here you get the probability that for each word that is computed. And usually this is the next word that would be generated by a large language model. So at the end of the presentation, or what takeaways I would like to communicate is that that the large language models use embeddings in order to be able to provide you with the feedback that you're used to receiving now. So one of the questions, or one of the things that people have been asking for that was really well addressed at the conference is this term called guardrails. And this is a term that I learned at the conference that I wasn't familiar with before, but essentially it's the ability for us as organizations or people working for organizations to be able to put some infrastructure around a large language model to prevent some of the issues that you've been probably hearing about. So for example, misinformation, hallucinations, prompt hijacking. So if we were to deploy something like a large language model in our product to consumers, we would try to avoid as much of these problems as possible. And the way that has been done is through guardrails. So the first step in making sure that the data stays within your organization, it was the first concept is vector databases. And Frank Liu, who is a Zilas, he's a co-author of the open source vector database called Milvis. And this vector database is very good at storing embeddings and retrieving the embeddings. And a lot of the times your organization, or as your data, as the data collection efforts grow, you're going to be collecting unstructured data that you will want to have in embeddings, or even storing the unstructured data to be able to make relations between certain pieces of information. And this is kind of the first step to safeguard that this information stays within your organization and you're able to leverage it using a large language model, which is not necessarily strong at this aspect of the role. So what the industry has come up with a retrieval augmented generation, or RAG. So Wells Fargo had the following problem at the conference. They mentioned that they had 100,000 PDF documents and they wanted their employees to be able to access these documents leveraging large language models. So they really liked the chat experience that ChatGPT provided, but they wanted to leverage that against their own data set and not necessarily anything that the model has been trained on or any other information. And they also wanted to prevent hallucinations or giving misinformation. So the way they did this is they converted their documents into embeddings, they stored it into a vector database, and then they deployed a large language model. And now, in order to connect these two, and this is what the industry has done thus far, is they call this technique called retrieval augmented generation. So essentially, when their employee at Wells Fargo asks a question, that question is converted into embeddings, and then those embeddings are searched inside of a vector database. Once the results come back from the vector database, that information is taken as context and fed with the original question into a large language model, which then the end user gets provided with a generated answer. And this is the strength of the large language model. Generating answers, making something in a human readable form, question and answering, and that's how they're leveraging the strengths of the language model while still providing privacy to their documents, their organization, and allowing or making sure that the information that's provided is accurate, so then the clients don't receive wrong information. The next kind of complexity lies around the legal issues or legislation, and this is not something that I was familiar with before the conference, but I'll give you an example of how I understood this. So outside of my house right now, a few streets down, there is a camera, a speed camera that's installed on the street. And as you're driving, it's taking photos of cars that are exceeding the speed. And I received a piece of mail that said that I exceeded the speed in a specific zone by 10 kilometers. And this machine, essentially, and if we were to consider that this machine may have some kind of artificial intelligence, or in the future it will be artificial intelligence, this machine decided that 10 kilometers over in a speed limit is enough in order to issue me a ticket. Now, when it comes to human intelligence, humans can apply compassion or some kind of other metric in order to be able to determine whether, this wasn't my first time speeding in this zone, whether, it would be nice to extend a courtesy to a driver, or whether there were other circumstances that should be considered. But as it stands, it cannot make all these assumptions, or it cannot have more insight because it would need a lot more context. So a lot of governments, and Chang from OpenAI was there talking about how OpenAI is at work to make sure that legislation happens, and all the different stakeholders, all the different governments, and all the different people involved in general about legislating this and regulating this technology, how important of an initiative that is. OpenAI themselves have been denying malicious users access to OpenAI and making sure that they're being audited and there is some kind of transparency. At the end of the day, it boils down that companies that will use large language models or generative AI or AI of any kind will be subject to more audits and more transparency in respect to how decisions were reached. So then if there is an appeal for a specific decision, then we can trace back the steps of exactly what happened and where the liability lies. A very entertaining speaker, Professor David Malan, who I highly recommend you see at CS50 on YouTube as a free course. He and his colleagues were also faced with a situation where they need to put guardrails around the generative AI or ChatGPT. Now, given the time constraints and given the fact that they wanted to roll out a more thorough solution, they noticed that Harvard students were using ChatGPT to do their homework. So at the beginning, they decided to kind of say that until we're ready and we have our own AI, or we're able to put some guardrails around ChatGPT, no one can use it. But here are a few tools that you can use to validate your work submission, so then you are more confident when you submit your work that it met a specific level of accuracy. And if you go to Visual Studio Code and go to the extensions tab, you'll be able to find these programs. One is called Debug 50 and the other one is Style 50. So these are some ways to overcome the technology until, and I think at some point they will be rolling out their own artificial intelligence. But this is another way to kind of help students, but still make sure that they're getting the education that they came to get. One of the reasons why I went to the conference was to see Sal Khan. He had a very, very interesting, interesting talk. I highly recommend if you have an opportunity to go hear him speak, because it's always very well done. So Sal and the team at Khan Academy, they looked at something that was measured by Benjamin Bloom sometime in the 1960s, which is the graph on the lower left-hand side, which showed the distribution of how students learn. And as you see, this is the normal distribution of the normal education system. But Benjamin Bloom also measured what would happen if students receive one-to-one tutoring. And as you see, the results are much better. A lot more students are getting better quality education. So since OpenAI went into partnership with Khan Academy, they developed something called Khanmigo. And there's a student and an educator mode. And as you type in, or as a student says, I would like this problem to be solved, it gives an answer saying, well, I can't give you the solution, but I can guide you there. I can be there as your tutor. And this is what Khan Academy is in the process of measuring to make sure that it yields the results that that benefit students. So it's a great solution. I think you can check it out on Khanmigo or learn more about it on YouTube. Lastly, I want to mention, I had the privilege to see Praneet talk. He can be seen here on YouTube under this link, or you can just type in his name into YouTube. He's a very ambitious engineer who took on quite a challenging project. And essentially the root cause or root concern for him was that global temperature is increasing, and a lot of times industrial systems such as data centers are leveraging or using a lot of energy to cool these facilities, and that in essence is contributing to the, as I mentioned, global temperature increase. While Praneet was not using large language models, he used a physics library to do the simulation, but a lot of the learning revolved around large data sets. And the agents that were deployed inside of these different facilities required to collect the data over and over again in order to introduce or allow reinforcement learning. And reinforcement learning is essentially a re-optimization of a specific model in order to be better suited to predict what the specific system is capable of doing and how it's functioning. Reinforcement learning is also applicable to large language models as well. And these models require this in order to continuously get better. So this is another area that will be very vital to the success of this technology. I wanted to say again, thank you to AI4 for an incredible conference. Great job. And thank you guys for listening. Have a great day.